And good afternoon. This is Marcus Hanscom. I'm your NAGAP Online Education Chair. And I just wanted to thank you all for joining us for what looks to be a great session from a good friend and colleague of mine, Sean Michael Green, who works up at Marist College in New York. And before we get to introducing him, I just wanted to remind you that we have our upcoming NAGAP Annual Winter Institute for Advanced Graduate Admissions Professionals coming up January 24th and 25th in the beautiful San Juan Marriott Resort and Stellaris Casino in Puerto Rico. So we'd love to have you join us. We're going to be covering a number of different really topical issues this year, including predictive enrollment modeling and integrated marketing, as well as social media strategies. So we're really excited for some of the topics this year. You'll hear from me on the bill, and we've got a good friend of mine, Tony Frega from Direct Development, and Giancarlo Bonilla, who's really a leading expert in predictive enrollment modeling. So we have a lot of great speakers and some great activities, so we hope you'll consider joining us for that. And of course, we have our upcoming NAGAP annual conference in Orlando in April, and hope you'll be coming down to join us as well. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Sean Michael Green. I'm fortunate that I can call him a colleague and friend. He's a great guy and really has a lot of great information for us. He's an author, an attorney, and the educator, and an entrepreneur. He has a pretty long rap sheet of things that he's done, so he's very well experienced in a wide variety of areas. He's a former enlisted Marine, and he realized he had a deep passion for higher education, and he currently is serving as Dean of Graduate and Adult Enrollment at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York, where he also oversees the Marist Veteran Liaison Office and serves as the faculty advisor to the Student Veteran Organization. So certainly a lot of great experience with the military. He holds a JD and an LL.M from Cornell Law School and an M.B.A from the University of Pennsylvania, and he's about to complete his M.B.A. from Marist. So he's racking up his graduate degrees and living the experience, living the dream. He's the author of Marching to College, Turning Military Experience into College Admissions, and many scholarly and professional publications on the military and higher education. Prior to pursuing his dream of higher education, Sean Michael was the CEO of several successful companies, and he entertained audiences as a stand-up comedian. So without any further ado, Sean Michael, it's yours. Thanks so much for presenting for us today. We're looking forward to it.
Thank you, Marcus. I am indeed living the dream. And it's always hard to end that bio on stand-up comedian because I think it sets a lot of expectations. And for a webinar, it's really tough because I'm not going to be able to read your faces, but it reminds me of a story that I want to tell you very quickly about my brother Jason. My brother Jason, who graces the cover of my book, is still on active duty in the Marine Corps. And I was sitting talking to him the other day, and I told him that I was delivering this webinar. And I told him I was talking about military education benefits. And I asked him if he wanted to listen in. And he said, sure. And he asked where the event was being held. I said, no, it's a webinar. He said, what's that? I explained it's like a high-tech meeting delivered over a computer. He asked, will you be able to see the audience? I said, no. So they'll be in their offices with all their work around them, their phones, their cell phones, their friends coming in and out, and you won't be able to see them? And I said, that's right. And he shook his head and said, never mind, I'll skip it. And I was a little offended. My feelings were a little hurt. I wanted to show off in front of my little brother. So I asked him why. And again, he's very military. And in a very calm voice, he said, I'm just aiming for efficiency. If you can't see me, I'll be completely ignoring you while working on other projects, answering emails, and scarfing down a sandwich. I'm just saving the step of logging in. And then he paused and said thoughtfully, I think your next webinar should be on the topic of efficiency in the workplace. I wouldn't come to that one either, but at least I'll be making the point for you. So that said, let me tell you what you're going to need for this webinar. First thing, there's a quiz. We're going to have it pretty quickly, but it will help you if you have a pen. Also, you have something to write on. If you have a quiet space to listen to this, and face it, we're all similar people, and I've been in webinars, I think I have some pretty good stuff here that will help you pretty quickly, but you got to be somewhere where you can pay attention to it. And the last thing is, understand that this is really complicated stuff we're going to be talking about. And my goal is not to make you an expert in the field of military education benefits or working with the military, but I hope to give you some things that you'll need as frontline recruiters and admissions professionals that will just make your life a little bit easier when that military person does come through the door. So the objectives. We're going to start out, I'm going to talk a little bit about just how to communicate with the military population and give you some basic information that will help you with that. Then we're going to talk about the military education benefits. Again, this is sort of a superficial look at them, but it's going to give you the details that you're going to need at the front lines. And finally, I'm going to try really hard to keep this simple. As we go through, if you have questions, the technology allows you to ask your questions and raise your hand. We'll stop every now and then, and Marcus will be able to give your questions into the microphone, and I can respond to them. So, that said, let's jump right into some basic information. And here's your quiz. Take a look at these 5 terms, and just very quickly, 1 minute or less, just jot down what you think the answer to these questions are. Just define these different categories: military, veteran, active duty, reserve, and National Guard. I'm not looking for textbook definitions, but if somebody walks in and they say, I'm a veteran, what does that mean? Or if somebody says they're still in the reserve, what does that mean to you? About 15 more seconds, and we'll get going. Okay, let me show you the answers that I have for these. When somebody says military, they're talking about the armed forces. That's the easiest question on the list. So if you got that right, give yourself 3 points. Veteran. That's anyone who's already served and is no longer serving. If somebody is still in the military, they aren't a veteran. If they are a reservist, they are not a veteran. They're a service member still. Active duty is one of the most misused terms out there. In fact, on the Marist website this last weekend, I had to write to our Chief Public Relations Officer and ask him to remove the word active duty from a little blurb that he had. Active duty are the people who are full-time. Every night when they go to sleep, they're in the military. Every morning they wake up, they're in the military. 168 hours a week. That term, though, oftentimes is used to talk about the entire military, and it overlooks a huge, and for those of us working in graduate enrollment management, very lucrative group, and those are reservists. Reservists come in all sizes, shapes, and colors. But when somebody says reserve, the first thing that should bring to your mind is somebody who's in the military part-time. 1 weekend per month they're serving, and 2 weeks a year they go off and serve. Some people are reservists, and they act like active duty. They're in 100% of the time. It is their day job. But typically, you should think about reserve as part-time. And for the National Guard, it's similar to the reserve, but at a state level. They tend to drill the same way. Again, they can be full-time, but typically they're part-time if they're in the National Guard. Just to show you some demographics, and this is based on 2010 data, but it shows pretty much the groups that you're working with. Let me start with the chart on the right, the orange and green, active duty versus reserve. Active duty is the majority of the U.S. Armed Forces, but you can see the reserve is a huge population. Also, officer versus enlisted. 2 more definitions, and again, I'm going to make a really, really gross assertion here when it comes to officer versus enlisted. Anytime somebody says that they're an officer, they mean they have a college degree already. Officers, that's the group, for those of you working on graduate programs, anyone who says they're an officer is somebody that you can start immediately talking about a graduate program. Enlisted typically are people without an undergraduate degree, but again, that's a gross generalization. A lot of enlisted folks do have the degrees, but to become an officer, the basic qualification is you have to have a college degree. Any questions so far?
None so far here, but just so everybody knows, I apologize for the oversight, but we didn't explain on the right-hand side of your screen in that panel, there is a questions box, and if you have any questions, please feel free to enter them in there at any time throughout the webinar, and periodically Sean Michael will be stopping, and I'll be able to pose your questions to him, and you can get the answers that you'd like.
Great. All right, let's talk about a sensitive subject really quick. Partially sensitive, but very, very valuable. PTSD and all sorts of other maladies and ailments that you hear about coming out of the military. That is very, very real. And it's a very serious issue. And it's something that any institution that's serious on working with the military, or serious about working with the military, should consider how they're going to serve these students. That said, PTSD is not a universal military experience. Not every person you meet coming out of the military is going to have that sort of an ailment or disability. But on the right side of the screen, isolation, that is more or less the universal experience. I know that when, I didn't go straight to college. I came out of high school, just barely, went straight into the military, and when I left active duty, I was 22 years old. I went to a community college, and I felt like the oldest, most experienced person on campus. I felt so out of place, felt like everyone was staring at me, because surely they knew that, I didn't belong there. And that is a very typical experience. What makes it challenging is if you look at that classroom scene there, it's hard to pick out who the person in the military is. Up towards the top right, there's a guy with a blue sweatshirt on. He could be military. But in the very front row, with the glasses there, that woman could be military as well. And they might not say that they feel isolated. But going into the classroom, one of the main things that's going to keep a military person from going into the classroom is that feeling that they're going to be isolated, they're going to be different from everybody else. So you have to keep that in mind. If you're going to talk to this population, that's one of the big barriers that you're going to have to break through, and you're going to have to find ways of getting through to them. So the big question for all of us as recruiters is, where are these people? Where are we going to find people from the military? And the first obvious answer is military bases. It is really tough. If you are not a military person listening to this right now, and you go to a school, and you wouldn't necessarily say that you're a military-friendly school. I would take away the friendly. You're not even a military school. You have some students who are veterans, but you don't do a whole lot. And your boss says, you know what, I want you to go to the giant Air Force base next door and go and talk to them about offering courses on the base. The chance of you making it onto the base are very slim. But the chance of you being able to negotiate a deal to offer courses there, much, much slimmer. It's hard to do business with the military base. It can be done. And anyone who's interested, you can reach out to me afterwards and we can talk through the process. There are certain consortiums that you can join and certain angles you can take to make that happen. But just bear in mind that even though you might be near a big military base, the military base itself is not a good place to go and try and recruit. You're going to have a lot of trouble there. Reserve centers are a little bit easier. Those part-time folks in the military, again, 1 weekend a month, they're going to a place. They are all congregating in one area. Sometimes it's easier to get access to those reserve centers to talk to military folks. Again, there are challenges there. But just understand that reservists are a good opportunity when it comes to recruiting in higher education. And by the way, the #1 reason why somebody would choose to go into the reserve instead of going on to active duty are the education benefits. That's somebody who wants to go to school. So right there, that's somebody, and I don't have data on this, but I would dare say that there are more, percentage-wise, there are more enlisted folks in the reserve with undergraduate degrees than on active duty with undergraduate degrees. Also, overseas, anyone who's doing international recruiting, just think about that. There are major bases overseas where there are military folks. So you might be getting inquiries from people who are stationed in Germany, and maybe they're coming back, maybe you have online programs. But just know that's one place where military folks end up going a lot. There are other duty stations. Folks in the Navy end up on ships. And every embassy around the world has Marines working there. So there are other places, but it's harder to target those. But you might be specifically located near one of those other duty stations, or have special access to one way or another. So again, if you have ideas on that, let's talk. Afterwards, if you want to reach out to me, I'm happy to answer any questions you have and maybe give you some guidance on it. But the big thing is in the community, those veterans, the people who are done serving, they're out in the community, and they are in with everybody else. So just think about that. You can have people who have served in the past, whether they've served 20 years ago, whether they served 6 months ago or 6 weeks ago. They're just out in the community. And so you'd recruit them just like you would anybody else. The thing about the military is it's a culture. We have our own language, our own symbols, our shared experiences. It is a group with a lot of tradition, and it's an indoctrinated culture. It's really pounded into everybody in the military. And it creates some challenges in communicating because it sets up a system where there are insiders and there's outsiders. And in between those two groups, there's a lot of room. But it really is a black and white thing. You're either an insider or an outsider. So I just want to talk through a little bit of that. And let's start with things that you think that they'll understand. You're talking to somebody in the military. It's natural. If you're anything like me, you meet somebody new, you want to find some common ground, or at least you want to be able to empathize with them and relate to them somehow. And one thing you assume about people in the military is, planes, tanks, ships, military equipment, that they're going to get that. But the fact of the matter is, if you don't work with tanks, you may go through 4 years in the military and never see a tank. So you might not be able to relate to it. A military person might not be able to relate to it the way that you think that it might not be that you might not have that renaissance in talking with them about it. Also, terms like KP duty, Section 8, AWOL. Think for a second about what those are. Think about KP duty. Do you know what that is? KP stands for kitchen patrol. It's cleaning up the kitchens. A Section 8 is when you're a crazy person and they kick you out of the military. AWOL stands for absent without leave. But the thing is, we don't use any of those terms. That's all language from MASH. So if you start talking to somebody about those terms, they're going to think you just watch too much 70s TV. Ranks and nicknames. This is a big one. I was at an event recently, not recently anymore, but I was at an event with somebody from my staff here at Marist, and there were a lot of military folks in uniform. And the person I was with was hesitant to call anybody by their rank. There were some ranks that were pretty obvious, but he was very hesitant to use the ranks. It is a respectful sign to use somebody's rank. There's nothing wrong. If you can identify somebody as a sergeant and you call them sergeant, that's a very good thing. You see somebody who's a lieutenant, you call them lieutenant, that's great too. Nicknames are trickier. There are things that in the military we might call each other, and some of them are better than others. For example, as a Marine, it would be normal for another Marine to call me Devil Dog or Leatherneck. That would be great. For somebody who has not served to call me that would be a little bit weirder. There are also things we call each other when we're angry. For example, for another Marine to call me Jarhead, that wouldn't be cool. But for somebody who was not in the military to call me Jarhead, that would be downright offensive. So just think about that in your dealings with military folks. Not that any of you are likely to just call somebody a Jarhead at random. Finally, I just want to mention this because it came up in a conversation recently. It is now customary. It hasn't been for that long, but it's now customary that when you meet somebody in the military, you thank them for their service. And I think that that is a really good tradition. It's certainly better than the alternative. But what I have found is it makes me feel very weird when somebody thanks me for my service because, we all go into the military for very different reasons. And, you might thank somebody for their service. They might respond awkwardly. Maybe they just went in for other reasons, or maybe they're just confused by the thank you. So just be sensitive to that. I do think that it's a good thing to say, and I'm not trying to discourage anyone from thanking a veteran for serving, but understand that that's something that can provoke some unusual responses. Certainly nothing bad, but I just want you to be aware that there is the potential for something behind it. I want to show you this image and hold this up to you as the hard part about trying to relate to the military. As you look at this image, the gentleman in uniform on the left, a couple of things. First of all, how long has he served in the military? Also, is he an officer or enlisted? Does he have a college degree? And what is the coolest thing about that guy? Also, in the background there, you'll see a Marine in dress uniform. And I'm wondering how he relates to the three people in the forefront. Is he the boss of them? Is he related to them in somehow? My point is, a military person looking at this image sees stuff right away. You know, the gentleman on the left is Sergeant Dakota Meyer. He's the first living Marine since Vietnam to win the Medal of Honor. The little bit of red and yellow on his sleeve down there, the hand that's holding the glass, that little mark there says that he's been in between 4 years and 8 years. The person on the right is the Commandant of the Marine Corps, and the person in the back is the Deputy Commandant. So that is the immediate subordinate of the person on the right in the forefront. The bottom line is, when somebody in the military sees military images, we know things. We're able to read those images. That's the problem between the insiders and the outsiders, is an insider has a real advantage in working with the military. Okay, for 2 extra points, if you can identify the person on the right of your screen, then give yourself some points. The easy part is you don't have to be an insider. What you have to do is you have to know that you aren't one. You have to be culturally sensitive, just like you're working with any other culture. Just be who you are, and approach the military as any other person, and you're going to be fine. But here's the best advice I have for you. I guarantee you, no matter what school you're at, you have people around you who are insiders. You're going to have students, you're going to have staff members, some of the faculty, and worst comes to worst, reach out to the alumni and find people who have served. Get people who can talk to the folks and set them up as a point of contact. If you have somebody who is in the military, you can send them to talk to one of your students about military stuff. Sometimes people in the military are just more comfortable talking, or veterans are more comfortable talking to that insider. So try and find somebody that you can get that will represent you well and can be that insider, answer questions for you. Are there any questions at this point?
None at the moment, although there's one logistical question that was asked, and I'll just point out to everybody that the video of this webinar actually will be posted on YouTube following the webinar, either later on this afternoon or probably tomorrow. So that will be available to you later on. There's obviously some great information and a lot to take in here, so we will have a recorded version of this available for all of you.
That is just downright scary. I probably should have known that before I started making fun of my brother. Anyway, I want to throw in a shameless commercial here. I have a colleague at Marist who is working on a study. And what she's looking for is she's looking for people who have acquired brain injuries. She's looking for people that have had that sort of trauma. It's for an academic study. She is a great person, and she will take good care of anyone that reaches out to her. If you can, jot down her name, her phone number, and her email address. If you know somebody, and if you're comfortable referring that person, you don't have to make an introduction or anything. You just pass her information along, but she needs a certain number of people to do the study, and certainly there are folks at Marist that are participating, but I thought this would be a good opportunity to just try and help her to get this done, because she is doing good work, and it's going to benefit everybody if she can get this done. So thank you all very much for putting up with that. And now, let's move into the education benefits. This is sort of a roadmap of where we're going to go. I'm going to talk about 4 different types of benefits. We're going to talk about the old GI Bill, the Montgomery GI Bill, because it hasn't gone away. It's still there. We'll talk about the post-9/11 GI Bill, which is what is probably first and foremost in everybody's minds. The Yellow Ribbon Program, because whether you have it, you don't have it, you need it, you don't need it, students are going to ask about it. And there are some real traps there with what they might be asking. And then very briefly, we'll talk about some other sources of benefits. So let's start with the Montgomery GI Bill. When somebody says Montgomery GI Bill, think cash. They are getting money. This is money that is going straight to them, and they could spend it on anything they want. As long as they're fulfilling the requirements of the program, as long as they're a student and they qualify for the bill, they're going to get a payment every month. And that payment is $1,546, I think, $65, somewhere in there. It's more than $1,500, less than $1,600 every month that they get. Doesn't cover any tuition or anything else, but they could spend it on whatever they want. It's important to understand that somebody who has this bill has paid into the program. During their first 12 months of service, they voluntarily said, I wanted to do this, and $100 a month was taken out of their paycheck to go into the program. The only big variable about how much money they're going to get is their rate of study. A person who's only taking 2 classes doesn't get as much money as somebody who's going full-time. That is pretty much everything there is to say about the Montgomery GI Bill. So now we're going to spend the next 10 minutes or so talking about the post-9/11 GI Bill, because it's much, much, much more complicated. There are 3 major components to it. There's a cash component. They're still getting payments straight to them. They can spend on whatever they want. But also there's tuition and fees that are paid directly to the institution. And finally, there's a book stipend. Again, that is paid directly to the service member or veteran. Now, there is a 4th piece of this. It's called the rural benefit. And this was written into law by a senator from Alaska. And the rule is you can get $500 if you are going to a school, but there is no way out of your community except for by air. Or if you live in a zip code that has fewer than, I think, 2 people per square mile. The bottom line is that senator from Alaska put this in because his state is the only one that qualifies. So if your target market looks a lot like this guy, that's very important for you to know. If you're not recruiting a lot of Eskimos, we will move on with the other benefits. Let's talk about who can use it. First of all, service members can use it, whether they're on active duty, whether they're Reserve, National Guard. They can use it. They have to qualify. They had to have had so much time on active duty or activated service to qualify. So they had to have been activated for at least 90 days. So a reservist who is part-time but is called up perhaps for Afghanistan or maybe to backfill a position in Germany, that's somebody who, if they're in for more than 90 days, they can get the post-9/11 GI Bill. Veterans, people leaving the military. This is mostly what you're going to see. Most of the people who are veterans, especially recent veterans from the last 10 years or so, are going to be talking about the post-9/11 GI Bill. And family members. It is possible for a service member to give this benefit to their, in the military they're called dependents, give them to their children or to their spouses. It can be done. I don't want to say that it's a rare thing that it happens. My prediction is that it's going to get more and more rare as time goes on. But you'll see family members come in. So you'll have somebody who comes in, maybe even coming to your institution as a traditional freshman, and they're going to have the post-9/11 GI Bill. The amount of money that they get through the bill, it depends on their eligibility and the number of credits attempted. So talking about the percentage of eligibility, that is based on qualifying time since September 10th, 2001. And they get a document from the VA that will say what the percentage is. So somewhere between, I mean, they could be 0%, otherwise it's between 40% or 100% of eligibility. So when you meet a veteran and they say they want to use the Post-11 GI Bill, one of the first questions you're going to ask is, do you know the percentage at which you're eligible? And if they say yes, their answer should be somewhere between 40% or 100% in 10% increments. So no one will say 67%. It'll be 60 or it'll be 70. If they don't know, the next question or the next thing you should tell them is you should go to the VA or online to the VA and get your certificate of eligibility. The other big variable here is full-time versus part-time. Again, if you're a part-time student, you don't get the same benefits. You don't get the same amounts as you would as if you were full-time. And also, academic success in pursuit of a qualifying goal. You can't fail all your classes. You can't take the same class over and over again. You have to be going towards a goal, and whoever your VA certifying officer is, it's one of the really painful parts about the Post-11 GI Bill is there's a whole system for auditing, and it requires that your institution verify that each veteran is making progress towards their goal, and if they aren't, the money shuts off. Any questions?
We've got a couple of, these kind of go back to your other options. I don't know if you want to jump in now, but we can throw in, there was one comment from Rachel Christopherson regarding VetCorps. She was saying that was a great resource in helping education learn and support soldiers in transition. I'm not sure if that's anybody you've worked with in the past.
No, I haven't, but any resources like that, if you could put them in the chat box so everyone can see them, that'd be great.
Sure, I'll put those out. So VetCorps was the one that she mentioned. And then there was one question regarding that study that you mentioned. Is the study only for military, or is it anyone with brain injuries?
I would encourage anyone to reach out to her and find out what her parameters are. I don't know how she would view that, but certainly anyone with any ideas that will help her with her research, she would welcome the phone call or email. So thanks for that question.
Great. That's it for now.
Okay, so let's talk about the three big components of the Post-11 GI Bill. Because again, if you're out there and you're recruiting students and somebody is a veteran and they're talking about Post-11 GI Bill, they want to know about the money. They want to know about these three big components. And the more you can talk about it, the more at least you understand what's at stake, the more successful you're going to be in admissions. So the first thing is the book stipend. The maximum, if you're 100% eligible, you get $1,000. And of course, you're only 40% eligible, you get $400. That is sent directly to the student, and you get it once a year. It's not a reimbursement. It's called a book stipend, but you can spend it all on bubble gum if you want. It is meant to pay for your books, but of course, those of us in school know that $1,000 won't quite do it. It does take a lot of time to get this stipend. So, and that's a question a veteran's going to have, is they're going to say, okay, if I start tomorrow, when am I actually going to get this money? The answer to any questions about money, and it's the answer that I give several times a day, is you have to talk to the VA. It's really outside of the hands of the institution because it's a transaction that's directly between the VA and the student, but you can warn them that it's going to take some time to really come through. One last note on the housing allowance. If your institution has the ability to do a short-term loan, a book loan for students, talk about military friendly. That's huge. You have somebody who's starting, they just left the military, they're starting your program, and they know they're going to get $1,000. It's just a question of are they going to get it in 2 weeks or 2 months. If the institution can give them that $1,000 so they can get their books, and then they pay it back with that stipend, that's a big way towards military friendliness. And that's something that we do at Marist. So let's move to the living allowance. This is the cash portion. This is what actually goes to them. This is also prorated by your percentage of eligibility. So you get 100% or you get 40% or somewhere in between. Here's the magical phrase, and you don't really have to memorize this, but it's just good to understand. And if you could at least pick up the acronym, it'll help. The living allowance is based on BAH for an E5 with dependents in the zip code of the school. For those of you who aren't in the military, this might sound like gibberish, but to me, this is just words on a page. Just makes sense. So for you, that might be in the civilian population, here's what you need to know. You don't have to actually know a whole lot about BAH or what an E5 is, but it's based on the zip code of your school. So if you know the zip code your school is in, you're only going to have to memorize one number, okay? Except, of course, there are always exceptions, but we'll talk about those too. Here's the tool you need. This is another opportunity for you to use that pen that I asked you to bring. It's an obnoxious website, but do me a favor and write it down. And again, I know that you're going to have access to this on YouTube, but if you write this on a Post-it note and you put it somewhere on your desk and then you can share it with other people in your office, it's going to be helpful. And I'm going to talk you through this tool. It's a simple tool, but I'm a simple person, so let me tell you what you need to do. When you enter this website in, you're going to end up on a page that looks like this. And what you're going to do is make sure that the year is right, because next year when you go to do this again, I don't know if the tool updates itself. Excuse me. The duty zip code is where you're going to put the zip code of your school. And for the pay grade, you're going to change that to E5. It's just a drop-down box. So here's what it's going to look like when you're done if you put it in for Marist. And then when you hit the Calculate button, you end up with a page that looks like this. And you want to focus on the left side of the page. So you want to look for with dependents. You completely disregard without dependents. What this means, at Marist College, a student who goes here right now who's 100% eligible under the post-9/11 GI Bill is going to get a cash payment every month of $1,518. Knowing that number, when a veteran comes in and says, how much money will I get for my BAH? If you're going full-time and you're 100% eligible, you're going to get $1,518. Now, that's really good to know, and if you think about how powerful this benefit is, remember the Montgomery GI Bill, which they already have. You know, a lot of folks are going to have that, and they elect to switch over and get the post-9/11 GI Bill. If they kept the Montgomery GI Bill, they'd be getting an extra $40 or $50 a month in cash. But they wouldn't have the tuition paid for, they'd be losing the book allowance. So for us, this makes a lot of sense. If you're in a zip code and you put this in and you find out they're getting $400 a month, then you understand what your challenge is. You understand what you're up against in terms of getting military folks in. If you do this calculation and it turns out that they're getting, you know, $2,200 a month, again, you know when you talk to somebody, they're going to get more cash out of doing this than using the old GI Bill. So it's just good to know yourself. Now here are the three big exceptions I wanted to mention to you. The first, if the program is 100% online, if they're going 100% online, then they get $684, which is, I believe, 50% of the national average of all those amounts is $684. If they want to go to a foreign school, so if you get somebody who's talking about, you know, are they going to go to your institution, or are they going to go to an institution in Paris, the amount that they're going to get is set. No matter what country, no matter what area they're in, they're going to get $1,386. And a break allowance. Again, this bill pays a lot of money, and so the government is trying to find ways of cheaping out on it a little bit, trying to conserve some of that money. And one thing they do is they don't pay for breaks. So if your term ends on December 15th and the next term starts on January 13th, during that period in between, there's no money flowing. They're only going to get paid for the first 13 days of December and the last 17 days of January.
Hey, Sean Michael, we have a couple of quick questions if I can throw them in here.
Sure.
The first question is post 9/11 GI Bill totally separate from the Montgomery Bill, or is it a subset of the Montgomery Bill?
Totally separate. What happens is somebody who has the Montgomery GI Bill has the opportunity to make an election to take the post 9/11 GI Bill. It only goes one way, and you can only make it one time. So if somebody says, I want to give up the Montgomery GI Bill and do the post 9/11, they can never go back again. But for 99% of people, it's going to make sense.
Okay, great. And then one other quick question. On that last slide, you had showed that online rate. Is that per month, or is that an annual contribution? That was a question from Susan Jacobs.
Per month.
Per month. Great.
Yeah,
Thank
good
you.
question. All right. So that covers the housing allowance. And again, that is going to be at the top of the minds of the people who are coming into school, because that's the money they're going to get to live on. Next, we're going to talk about tuition and fees, which is going to be at the top of the minds of your school, because that's the money you're going to get to live on. The tuition fees at public institutions are covered up to the in-state rate. So if you are at a SUNY institution, you're going to get the program will be covered up to the maximum in-state rate. So if you have an out-of-state veteran who wants to go to a SUNY institution, only up to the in-state will be covered. Now, the institution, of course, can create a policy so that all veterans are treated as in-state. I know that a lot of institutions in a lot of states have done that. Private institutions, there's a cap, and last year was $17,500. And adjusting with some fancy math, we are now up to $18,077.50. The cap is going to get very hard to keep track of very soon. But that is the maximum amount. So if your institution, if somebody is going, and it's based on the bill. So if your institution, somebody's in a program, they're taking 4 classes, and their bill comes out to $18,000 per year annually, then they don't have to pay anything out of pocket, and the institution doesn't have to think about it. They're going to get all their money. If the bill is $18,100, it's over the cap. The institution's only going to get $18,000 or $18,077.50. So, if there is a gap, if it is $18,000, or I'm sorry, $18,100, there's going to be a small gap there. Who covers that gap? Does the institution cover it? Does the military swoop in and throw some more money? No. It is up to the veteran, up to the person coming back to cover that shortfall. That's why it's so important to understand, because knowing how your programs are priced is going to make a really big difference. If you can tell somebody who's coming in and they want to know, are they 100% covered, knowing where your tuition is in relation to that cap at the private institution, that's going to be huge. Now, here's something for you to know. If you're talking to administrators at your school, the money doesn't come in on time, and when it does come in, it might not be the right amount. This program can really be a headache. It's lucrative. There's a lot of money out there, but it can be a bit of a headache. So just keep this in the back of your mind just for internal discussions with the institution. But the problem is when the institution tries to take it out on the veteran. The institution says, well, your bill isn't fully paid, so we're not going to release your transcripts until we get that money. Or, we won't release your student loans. Maybe someone's taking our supplementary loan. But until the bill is cleared, they won't release that money to the veteran. But the bottom line is, you can be assured, at least as sure as any of us can, that the government knows what it's doing. And the money will come. It might take some time. And it might take, once it comes in, it might be wrong, and maybe there has to be some back and forth. But you know you're going to get the money. And if you know that, treat the student as paid in full. Act like that bill's already been paid. Let it happen behind the scenes. It's only when institutions drag the student through that internal battle between the VA and the institution that it creates problems. Okay. Now we're at the point of talking about some takeaways on this. The first thing is, if somebody says post-9/11 GI Bill, you know right away that there are several components. You know that they're going to get some cash. You know there's book allowance of no more than $1,000 annually. And you know that tuition and fees will be paid directly to the institution. You want to find out the rate at which they're eligible. This is one of the first questions you want to ask. Because if they're 100% eligible, it changes the conversation. You want to already have in your pocket what the living allowance rate is for your school zip code so that you know how much cash they're going to get. You can quote that to them. And you want to know how your tuition fees are going to relate to the cap. And if you're a state institution and they're from out of state, you just want to know what your policy is on that. And here's another idea, and this is why it's important, why I had you write down that URL, because you could just look it up once and be done with it. You memorize one number, at least for this year, and you can walk away happy. But here's something else you want to do. Look at your competitors to see how their zip codes and tuition rates and policies stack up against yours. You want to know, are other schools doing things for veterans that you aren't? And you also want to know how it works in terms of the zip codes. Because that living allowance doesn't always make sense. If somebody is somebody's attending a school in Manhattan, the amount that they're going to get is going to be higher than it will if they go to Marist in Poughkeepsie, New York. The cost of living is much higher in Manhattan. But for anyone who's familiar with Poughkeepsie and where we're set, looking out my window, I can almost see SUNY New Paltz, a really, really good SUNY school. That SUNY school is on the less expensive side of the river. We're on the more expensive side of the river. The rate that somebody gets for the living allowance over there is much higher than it is at our school. It just doesn't make sense. So you want to know what the rates are for the competing schools so that you know how you stack up. All right, any questions before we jump into Yellow Ribbon?
We've got one quick one. It says, how likely is it that the vet receives the full amount for private institutions per year?
Well, the full amount, there are two ways of looking at that. One is, how likely is it that a vet's going to be 100% eligible under the post-9/11 GI Bill? And at this point, I would say that most of them are. I would dare say about 90% of the vets that you're going to see are going to be 100% eligible. If you're talking to somebody in the reserve, that's going to be different, or it can be different. But I think that the real question there is, what are the chances that the tuition and fees at a private institution are going to fall beneath the cap? I can tell you at Marist, all of our graduate programs fall beneath the cap. It's gonna come into play as we talk about Yellow Ribbon program, but you know, we are a highly selective private institution, and all of our graduate programs are priced affordably enough and not related to veteran issues. It just happens to be the way they're priced that they all fall beneath the cap. We haven't had a graduate student who's needed it yet.
And one more question that was posted here. Does the private institution cap, is it the same for all degree levels, such as master's versus doctorate?
It is. It is. And undergraduate as well.
Good.
Okay, let's talk about the Yellow Ribbon program. Basically, you know, I have a little blurb on here, but it allows the institution to work with the government to cover the shortfall. And we'll talk about how that actually works. But something you need to know, there are two reasons why you want to participate in the Yellow Ribbon program. One is financial. You'll get some money, you'll help some vets, and that's good stuff. But it's the marketing and PR. I can't tell you, when the Yellow Ribbon, when the Yellow Ribbon, I get very excited to talk about this stuff. When the Yellow Ribbon program first started, I can't tell you how many phone calls I got. And I would answer the phone, and within the first few seconds, the person would say, does Marist College have the Yellow Ribbon program? And at the time, we hadn't signed up yet. I hadn't quite started. Is Marist College going to do the Yellow Ribbon program? And we were priced so affordably, I was thinking no. And by the time I got the O and no out of my mouth, they had hung up the phone. even people in the military, even veterans, they don't understand what the Yellow Ribbon program is. So it's important for you as recruiters to understand that. That people might be asking questions, and they don't even really understand what they're asking. But Yellow Ribbon is equated with military friendliness. And a lot of people will only go to a school that had the Yellow Ribbon program. Whether they need it or not doesn't really relate or factor into the decision. So just keep that in mind. Just from a marketing and PR perspective, you want to participate in this program. Now, the population that it won't help, anyone who is less than 100% eligible under the post-9/11 GI Bill, it doesn't apply to them. So if somebody is 90% eligible, the Yellow Ribbon program does nothing for them at all. All right, let's talk through how it actually works. So we're going to assume that a private institution has a tuition rate, just make it very simple, $28,077.50. So the cap's $18,077.50. So there'd be a shortfall of $10,000. And remember, it's up to the service member or veteran to pay that amount. But what can happen through the Yellow Ribbon program? The school can waive up to 50% of the shortfall. They can give institutional aid to cover it. They can just give a straight-up tuition discount. They can make 50% go away. They cannot charge the veteran or service member for that amount. But then the government would match the amount and pay the institution. So in this case, that $10,000, half of it the institution would just eat. It would lose that money. But the government would then give the institution another $5,000. So on a financial level, it can make sense. So some final thoughts on the Yellow Ribbon program. It is essential for marketing. You definitely want to participate in it. The campus needs to create some policies around the Yellow Ribbon program. If your institution does it, you'll have only so many slots. So you might only have 50 Yellow Ribbon program seats. And it's important to know how many you have, because if you're talking to a whole lot of people who want it, you need to make sure that you understand how they qualify for it, to whom they would speak on campus to get on a list or register for it, whatever the policy is to get them that into the program. And you want to make sure you're not exceeding the number of seats that you have. And the big thing is, every year you get to decide over again if you want to participate. So in May, your institution will be, and I don't think that the government does a good job of reaching out to institutions and telling them this, which is why I'm telling you now. In May, actually start looking in April, to see, it's time to renew, it's time to change, or it's time to sign up. So your institution will have the opportunity to do something with the Yellow Ribbon program in May. Any questions on post-9/11 GI Bill and Yellow Ribbon before I go on to the last category of benefits?
One question, is there a cap to amount that the Yellow Ribbon program will cover, I guess in total?
No, there isn't. As long as your institution will waive the other 50%, there's no cap to it.
And one more here. Is there a limit to the number of degrees that the post-9/11 GI Bill will pay for?
That's a good question, but no, there isn't a limit to the number of degrees. You only have so much time to use the bill. And this is only for post-9/11. It's different with the other programs. But you have up to 15 years after you leave the service to use the bill. You can only have, and again, there are exceptions to everything when it comes to the government, but you get 36 months worth of benefit. There's a way in very limited and strange circumstances to extend it out to 48 months. But generally speaking, you have 36 months of eligibility. And as many degrees as you want to try to fit into those 36 months, you can do.
And another question related to Yellow Ribbon. The college must waive 50% of the overage in order to participate or have the Yellow Ribbon program work with a private institution?
That's a really good clarifying question. Actually, no. I'm telling you what I perceive to be the best practice. But if an institution, let's say the shortfall is $10,000, the institution might only say, okay, we're going to waive $2,000. The government will match $2,000. If there was a shortfall of $6,000, that the veteran would have to pick up. So it doesn't have to be 50%. Frankly, I don't know of any institution that is using the Yellow Ribbon program partially that way. But the way that the bill is written, no, it doesn't have to be 50%. Good clarifying question.
That's all for
All
now.
right, let me run through this last little bit, and we're going to make short work of this slide. Disability and vocational rehabilitation, we could do a whole other 1-hour webinar on that. Don't worry, we won't. But it's a big topic. So just know that there is something out there. If you talk to somebody who is, they self-disclose that they're a disabled vet, and they're talking about using military benefits, they might not be talking about the GI Bill anymore. They might not be talking about the post-9/11 GI Bill. They might refer to something called Chapter 31. They might talk about voc rehab is sort of the lingo that they use. And again, it's complicated. Just understand there is a difference there. And if you hit something like that, get them to your vet coordinator, vet liaison, benefits administrator. But just understand there is a difference. Military tuition assistance. If you talk to somebody who is currently serving on active duty, and again, there are ways that reservists can use this as well. But if you bump into somebody who is on active duty, you might want to talk to them about military tuition assistance. And the I would just say TA. So if you're talking to them, you might want to say, does your unit, do you have access to TA? And what that is, those are dollars that are paid by the Department of Defense directly to your institution. And there are strange caps on that. It will only cover up to $250 per course, and there's an annual cap of $4,500 per year. Each branch of the service has its own version of TA, but typically that's what it is. $250, I'm sorry, I said per course, but I meant per credit. $250 per credit with a cap of $4,500 a year that they can use. That is outside of the GI Bill and everything else. So anyone on active duty, this is free money that they can get and apply directly to the school to pay for school. There are different state programs. And in some states, if you're a combat vet, you get your tuition reduced. In New York State, there is something, it's only for combat vets that they receive a small amount of money paid directly to the institution that comes in after all other aid is applied. So what I would suggest you to do is look at your state and figure out what sort of state benefits there are that will apply. And certainly when it comes to National Guard, because that is a state organization, people in the National Guard will sometimes have very, very strong benefits to apply to school, always at a public institution. But some of those benefits translate over to private institutions as well, where sometimes it will cover up to 75% of tuition at a private institution. And the last thing are institutional benefits. There is nothing to stop an institution from doing its own thing with the military. And I'll tell you that at Marist, our trustees were goodly enough that they granted us a 25% discount for anyone who is currently serving in the military to attend Marist. So when you take that military tuition assistance of $250 a credit and you add in a 25% discount off of our prices, it helps us to compete a little bit better in that market. So take a look and see if your school offers any sort of institutional benefits. If you think that it's going to be a competitive advantage for you, you might want to have a discussion with people about what you could do, what sort of benefits you could do at an institutional level. All right, my last substantive slide here, final thoughts. First, understand that even for an insider, it's hard working with the military. And certainly work with the benefits. There's a lot of science to it. There are policies and rules, but it's also an art. You sort of get used to it after a while, or you sort of just feel your way through it. It's tough stuff, and it's hard to go from zero to expert status. So So just bear in mind that as you work with the military, don't expect it to ever be easy. Find those insiders who can help you, and they might be closer than you think. And students are a great resource. I know at Marist we rely on our military students a lot, and they do a great job for us. And the last thing, and I mean this more than I can possibly convey, contact me. I'm not going to poach your students. If you have questions, if you have ideas, if ever you get confused about any of this stuff, pick up the phone, give me a quick call, and I'm happy to talk you through it. I do like talking about this stuff. I don't know if it's coming through the webinar, but I get very enthusiastic about it, and I'm very happy to help any of you with questions on this. And that's it for me. My next slide is going to be contact information for me, but are there any questions right now?
Doesn't look like there are any questions at the moment, but we've got one here. Can you please put up the web address for defense? I actually posted that in the chat. I believe everybody has access to that. But if you don't, maybe Sean Michael, you can pull that up, but that web address for the BAH, it is in our chat, so you can see it there as well.
There you go.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Are there any other questions we can entertain right now? You've certainly covered a lot of ground, so.
I tried to keep it as simple as I could, but
it looks like there aren't any further questions, so I guess if you want to pop up that contact information, sure.
I seem to have run amok. Wow. And sincerely, thank you all very much. I know that webinars can be a little tough, but I appreciate you guys all hanging in there and learning this stuff with me.
Great. Thank you, Sean Michael. We really appreciate you joining us. This is fantastic information, and we're really excited because not only we'll be able to provide this to you in video form on YouTube, we'll also send you the slides later on this afternoon, and then we're excited because we have a brand new NAGAP website coming out in the spring, so we're excited for some of the opportunities we'll have to post some resources, and surely this will be part of that online resource library that we'll provide for all of our members. So thank you all so much for your support of NAGAP and our continued growth, particularly on the online education initiatives, and thank you, Sean Michael, for joining us. We really appreciate it. So everyone have a great afternoon.